lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Hello, horror hounds, and welcome to Now Slaying, an It Slays podcast production where we break down the latest and greatest in the world of horror. I'm your not-so-humble host, Colton.
I'm Rowan.
And today on the show, we are back with another double feature, covering the new religious horror movie Immaculate, as well as the next entry in the Ghostbusters franchise, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, which were both released March 22nd, 2024, exclusively in theaters. Now, Rowan, I know you're a fan of the Ghostbusters. It's a franchise that comes up from time to time in horror circles, but we're going to leave that discussion until the end of the show. Instead, I want to know, are you a fan of Sydney Sweeney? Are you a fan of nuns? And were you looking forward to Immaculate?
I mean, these are all conversations I feel like we've had on the main show. We're
not breaking new ground here.
Yeah,
no.
I've been disparaging against Sydney Sweeney. Obviously, we had an epic Madame Web rant, and I may have asked, is she really, really that good?
We'll definitely get into that.
Yeah, you'll have to listen further if I've changed my mind or if it's exactly the same. In terms of nuns, we've also had this conversation that as a completely unreligious person, for some reason I just love religious-based horror movies. I don't know, maybe it's like the sicko in me. I'm just like, oh, these idiots believing in this stuff and they're scared of this, and I'm like, oh, like, I don't know, I just revel in it. But I like a good, I think people are kind of dubbing this nunploitation. So, I love a good nun horror movie, as long as it's not The Nun.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. Wait, are you coming out as a supporter of The Nun and The Nun 2?
No, I am not.
Okay, right.
Back at you, though. What do you think of Sydney Sweeney and nuns?
Well, I was brought up not as a Catholic, I'm more of like from an evangelical faith, so I don't really have too much of an opinion on nuns. I will say that religious horror has always kind of been the horror that I sort of gravitate towards. It was the one that I always found to be the scariest when I was growing up, just because obviously if you go to church quite regularly, a lot of these religious horror movies, they have aspects that you'll see week to week in church, and they kind of reincorporate like the religious imagery or, the texts or the Bible verses and stuff that you're hearing. And lots of times they kind of tinge it in a new way that makes it a little bit scarier, especially like if you're brought up in a church or a faith that like believes in stuff like demonic possession or like, actual like spirits and stuff. It just adds this extra layer of creepiness to it all. So, I'm a big fan of religious horror as well. Sydney Sweeney, I've never watched Euphoria. What I've seen her in is pretty limited. It's, Madam Web. I watched Anyone But You like a week or two ago.
I still haven't seen that yet. It's on my list.
I thought she was pretty good in it. Like, obviously her and Glenn Powell have like some good chemistry and whatnot in it, but I'm still not 100% sold on her either. Like, once again, we'll get into her, her performance and whatnot in this movie and see if she won me over, but it wasn't like her involvement didn't like instantly make me look forward to this movie.
She was fantastic on Saturday Night Live. I watched her Saturday Night Live appearance. I think it was like a couple weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, and she was actually like really good.
Okay, well, that's the thing, right? Like, she is obviously a rising star. From her, monologue and stuff on Saturday Night Live, I mostly saw like people just saying like, oh wait, am I woke now because I'm supporting her in this dress that she's wearing or whatever? Like, it was just like, it was just mostly most of people just like, ogling her during her monologue, I think. But I did like the story surrounding this movie where essentially this was one of her early roles that she auditioned for back when she was just trying to break in. And then basically the movie couldn't get up and running because it was just a little, indie movie trying to get funded. But, now that she has some, cachet within Hollywood, that she went back and kind of returned to this movie and chose to produce it. So that was something where I was like, oh, I kind of admire that like, this script or something about this character, drew you in like a decade ago and you still remembered it and went back and, actually got it started. Like, that, I respect that. I also heard that like it had good reviews coming out of South by Southwest, and I think Neon picked it up for like distribution, and like they're a pretty well-known, film production company and distributor. So it was just literally like, I don't know, it had a lot of good things going for it that kind of, as we got closer to the release date, I was like, oh, I think there's actually some reasons for me to like look forward to this, and I guess we'll get into it here in a minute. So yeah, were our prayers answered? Is this everything we imagined it to be? Well, before we get into that, let's throw it on over to the trailer.
I know God saved me for a reason, but I guess I'm still searching for what that reason is. Too much blood of Christ.
It's a miracle. You are with child.
Out of all the women in the world, why did he choose me?
How can we trust what's inside you?
What you just heard is from Immaculate, directed by Michael Mohan and written by Andrew Lobel. And the story is as follows. Cecilia, a woman of devout faith, is offered a fulfilling new role at an illustrious Italian convent. Her warm welcome to the picture-perfect Italian countryside is soon interrupted as it becomes clear that Cecilia's new home harbors many dark and horrifying secrets. Now here on Now Slang, we like to keep things relatively spoiler-free up front before getting into the more in-depth spoiler-filled discussion. So Rowan, what are your spoiler-free thoughts on Immaculate?
Well, I think, Italy, perfect setting for this because I really think they're kind of wearing their influences on a sleeve with this one. Mm-hmm. The love for Italian horror is just like on 1,000 this entire movie. I've never seen it's been a long time since I've seen like a newer movie just show appreciation for not just like 70s Italian horror, but like lots of like giallo going on here. Far more erotic than I was expecting to witness in this, which I can't say was necessarily like a negative thing, because I think if you're going to wear those influences of Italian horror, I mean, that's like a big part of it, of their culture with film. So it was just very interesting to see, especially with Michael Mohan. I did have a chance to hear like a couple interviews with him and him talk about this film, and he doesn't really seem like he's overly a horror guy.
Oh, really?
Basically, I didn't know anything about him, but the fact that, he basically has known Sydney Sweeney for, 10 years, and he produced a show that I've never seen called Everything Sucks. I think it might be on Netflix or something, but apparently...
Okay, I didn't see that. Yeah, I've loosely heard of The Voyeurs, which I think stars Sydney Sweeney and, God, what's his name? Smith.
Yeah, Justice.
Justice Smith.
Yeah,
yes.
Justice Smith.
Yeah. I haven't seen it. Yeah.
Apparently she is in this TV show also. It was one of her first things. So there's this relationship, but I just think it's so interesting because not only, him not necessarily being a horror guy, it seems, but her also kind of, I never knew there was this facet of fascination of horror for her. And like you said, this is a project she revisited, which is kind of a weird move for someone just on this rising star path like her.
Well, yeah, it's essentially, you were just, a co-lead in a superhero movie and just
a great one.
And just led one of the most popular rom-coms of the last couple of years. And you're like, you know what, for my producerial debut, essentially, I don't know, maybe she's been involved in a producer's capacity and some other things, but they made a big deal over her producing this movie, and I found it quite interesting as well to produce kind of an independent horror movie then also star in it. And a lot of her acting in this, I'd say, is kind of against the type of sort of thing that I've seen her play. Once again, there probably is some nightmarish sequences with her in Euphoria, but I haven't seen Euphoria. So a lot of what I know her for is being a little bit more of kind of an airhead sort of role where it's like, oh, she's there to be sexy, essentially, for the men to look at. It is kind of her role in a lot of these movies I've found.
Yeah, I've only ever seen, I think, almost all of season 1 of Euphoria, but I never finished it.
Okay.
Not because it wasn't good. We already know my history with TV. I just can't stay focused on television. But yeah, this is like nothing she's ever done. And I'm going to break the tension right here of my thoughts on it. Like, I'm just pleading, like, Sydney, just stay in this lane. I love it. I'm back on the Sydney Sweeney train. I'm like, this is what you should be doing. Let's go the Micah Monroe path. Let's just hit all the horror movies. And
yeah, I think she was pretty great in this one as well. I like, if I'm gonna be like nitpicky, I do think she was better in the moments of like intensity, like these high pressure kind of horror moments in the movie where her eyes are bulging out of her head, she's screaming, maybe she's even going a little bit like crazy over the top. I thought she was excellent in those sorts of moments. I will say the more like subdued, more like buttoned up, like nun type stuff, I will say I think she acted it fine, but I think it was her voice, weirdly enough, that was like throwing me off a little bit. I almost wish she had like some sort of like dialogue coach or something involved in this, because they mentioned that she's from Detroit, and whenever she opens her mouth, it just sounds like almost like a Valley Girl vocal fry, which is just like, I don't know. It was a little bit, off, but just the performance as a whole, I was very impressed. The entire thing, I thought she was great.
Yeah, and I'm gonna say that word that you're scared to death of this whole movie is camp, and it's like camp well done in my opinion. Like,
oh, I didn't think it was campy at all. But
and I think to me it was just because the minute it started, I'm like, oh my god, the Italian horror of it all, and the scores kicking in, and I'm just like, oh yeah, this is like just very. I don't think it's like, in your face camp, but I was just like, everything seems like a little too heightened to the fact that like they know the moments they're playing out. Like they know the beats, because realistically, especially once we get into the spoiler section, like there's beats that even if you have no idea what this movie is about, like that the minute it starts, you're like, all right, like this is gonna happen, and that stuff does happen. I just think it was really well played out, and like, I don't know how your audience was, but my audience had a time with this. Obviously, more so everyone, was gawking at Sydney Sweeney for the most part. And I think when this movie kind of flips its switch towards the third act of this, like everybody was just like edge of their seats ready for it, and I just really love that.
Oh yeah, there was definitely some reactions from my audience as well, obviously more so in the third act, but there was stuff earlier in the movie just like more so kind of like just revealing, like, let's say like, oh, that someone was injured in a sort of way, that something was kind of covered up, I'm dancing around like little vague spoilers, but there was definitely like kind of like you feel wincing almost from the audience every now and then, even earlier in the movie. And I will admit that I think basically all of the beats of this movie are cliche. And if you've seen the trailer, quite frankly, that I just watched right before we recorded this, you probably have most of the movie spoiled for you that, we're not going to get into here on the podcast, because hopefully you're like us and you went in without seeing the trailer. But I still want to say, like, all the beats I thought were set up and well executed. Like, they weren't just sloppily done, or like they weren't just going through the motions. They were acting as if this was your first religious horror movie you've seen that that features nuns in a convent and all this sort of thing, right? Like, it was the type of thing where I just thought it was well done. And there was even one jump scare that I think the trailer spoils within the first 5 seconds. It got me, I'm not gonna lie. I'll get into the details of it in the spoiler discussion, but I was kind of surprised that this movie that I would say 90% of it was pretty, cliche, and I could easily tell where everything was going, but it still kind of got me at one moment that I was impressed with.
I was going to say, well, and to me, like, this kind of proves to me the fact that cliche doesn't have to be bad. Like, it can be effective and good if it's done well. I think it was interesting you were talking about just hitting those beats of, like, just a horror movie. Because, like I said, I did get a chance to hear Michael Mohan talk about it a bit, And like he fully went into this talking about how he looked at this as like a gateway movie for people that go to horror movies all the time, that he wanted to gateway them into gonzo movies. And, you know, I think once we get into the spoiler section, we'll talk about that a little bit more, but I think he did his job.
Oh, there was loads of people here that I don't think they usually go to horror movies. Like, you know, we're not talking about Ghostbusters Afterlife yet, but there was like maybe a dozen people in my
Not that
screening.
gruesome, no.
This was, you know, I don't know. It was probably 30 or 40 people in there. I was impressed. It was in the smallest theater that we have here, and it was, you know, at least 2/3 full for sure. And like I said, it was an audience that was like, I don't think a lot of them are usual horror viewers. It seemed like a lot of younger girls were there that probably just, you know, idolized Sydney Sweeney to a certain degree.
Anyone but you is on the top of their list for films.
Exactly, right? Yeah, like basically it seemed like they all enjoyed it. There was a couple of people, I would say, upset leaving the movie that I heard people discussing some of the things that happened in this movie that we'll definitely get into, which once again, it was like, I don't know if they were upset in terms of like this was horrific or this was disgusting or I can't believe they went there, but it was almost like they didn't expect it and they were kind of just like, that's crazy, like I can't believe this happened sort of thing, which I don't know, is kind of the mark of a decent horror movie in my opinion. A lot of stuff that I've seen in theaters this year, you know, I left kind of just feeling underwhelmed or bored or just like, oh my god, it's this other Blumhouse movie that just sucks, you know, which I didn't really think this was. One of the things I kind of want to mention that we haven't touched on yet is I just felt like the convent itself felt like a real place to me. That could just be the location, obviously. Yeah. Maybe you just got lucky with a good location. Maybe it was set design. Maybe it was the costuming kind of all bringing it together. But it felt like a realistic spot to me that I think really like added a lot to the movie. Like it just felt like it would be functional. There were parts of this movie where it almost felt like a period piece for a long time, and it kind of just lulls you into like almost like this old way of life that we don't really see too much. You know, there's not a whole lot of smartphones and stuff in the movie, for example, that I just want to give it props for because it looked very professional and very well done to me. I wasn't taken out of it at all for most of the movie.
Yeah, no, it looks fantastic. The location was just like, I mean, it was breathtaking anyway in general, but I would be interested. I didn't look where they did they actually shoot this in Italy or something, but whoever scouted the location, salute to them, because, you know, especially I thought, you know, that not just like the convent, but obviously, you know, like our setting in the third act and stuff, like everything just looked fantastic and lived in and, you know, real, like you said, and yeah, just amazing.
Yeah, I just quickly Googled as you were talking there that the filming did take place in Rome, so there's probably a chance that they actually just got the film in like a real convent or a real, you know, an older place that like kind of fit the film.
They got that Sydney Sweeney access, so
exactly, you know, she is becoming, once again, she's a rising star. She's starting to become a little bit known. She might be able to, you know, get harder locations to get if you're an absolute nobody. One of the other thing I just kind of want to mention, this is kind of more of a negative, I guess, I don't know if this was an issue in your movie screening, but like the cinematography to me, it was really well done, but I found it very dark the entire movie. I don't know if it was my projector. Once again, I was in the smaller movie theater, kind of relegated to like little indie things that not many people are going to show up for. So I don't know if it was just like a bulb issue or whatnot, but like literally the cold open, that kind of feels like it's ripped straight out of The Nun 1, pretty much. I couldn't even really make out what was happening to the sister who was in duress in the scene. Like, you know, she kind of slips out of a gate and then something happens to her leg, but like I couldn't see what it was. It was so dark that I was like, okay, I know she's injured in some way, but I have no idea what just happened.
Oh, and that was kind of like a bulb or something, because I fully saw it. And
okay, you saw everything.
Now, all right, so I also like dark films, so that could be another thing, is that I actually like it like really dark.
So that was the thing where a lot of it worked for me, where I was like, this has really like harsh shadows draped over kind of like these, you know, religious figures with their faces and kind of like torment or pain and whatnot. That kind of, you know, makes it look a little bit spookier. A lot of these are like paintings and whatnot of like grisly biblical scenes or whatnot that kind of all add to this vibe that the movie's going for. It was just, for me, a lot of it was very difficult to see. A lot of it felt like almost like I was watching the movie through like a black sheet put over the screen. Like, you know, like not quite that bad, but it was very, very dark that I was just like, I don't know if this is a stylistic choice or just like a technical issue. So, I mean, I'm not happy that I watched the movie in that way, but I guess I'm happy to know that you could make out some of the finer details in the movie that I missed. I guess another thing I'll touch on before we get to the spoiler-filled discussion is the gore. There winds up being gore in this movie, and they don't shy away from it at all. I was actually kind of not horrified by what they showed, but I was definitely surprised. Because a lot of movies of this caliber, especially when you're starring like an A-list actor, you know, basically an A-list, I don't know truly if she is or not, but whatever, you know, it's a well-known actress. It's like you would expect them to be in a movie where if there's any gore that happens, it would just be kind of like subtle. You know, I'd expect it mostly would happen off screen or a little spurt of blood here or there. There's like straight up like people getting their faces ripped off in this movie that I was kind of surprised with. And when I was watching it, I was like, I think Rowan's gonna like how far this movie goes at times. Like there's some gnarly stuff in this movie that I wasn't expecting for what I expected to be an incredibly subdued, just religious horror movie.
Like I said, salute to Michael Mohan for flipping that switch and giving the gateway, because I was very surprised. I did not go into this thinking this was gonna have any gore. I was like, this is gonna be like you said, you know, this is for the anyone but you crowd. It's gonna be like, you know, my experience of, you know, watching The Nun or something. Like, it's just gonna be some jump scares and you know, pretty basic. I saw the runtime before I went in, so I'm like, yeah, this is gonna be in and out, paint by numbers kind of romp, and I'll probably just walk out unhappy and whatever. And yeah, when the gore hit, like even me, there were scenes that even me, I was like, ooh, like you know, it made me cringe just a little bit.
It's well done. That's the thing. Like it, you know, it gore is never something that really scares me, but every now and then it can give a visceral reaction, like, ooh, they went there, like, damn, that's a good effect, like, you know. And I will say this movie had some little moments like that I was impressed by. For sure. So yeah, we're kind of tiptoeing around everything. So I think it's probably time to hop over to the spoiler discussion. So let's let the people know. Would you recommend this movie? I'm giving it a recommendation. I think you should check it out in theaters. Indie movie. Hopefully it'll make its money back and then some.
To me, I think you have to see this in theaters. I think it's like the perfect theater movie. There was lots of dates going on in my theater. You could tell they were loving it. Like,
this one really sets the mood. For sure.
It really sets the mood. You know, it was a good time, and this is the one time that, you know, I'm always very curious. I think we had the discussion once about how like recently all our theaters have like in Canada have brought in like alcohol in our parts, and this one, you know, usually I'm kind of against it because all I hear is like people throwing beer cans on the floor halfway through the movie. This one, I was like, this is like a drinking and having fun movie. I highly encourage it. Yeah, I just think the theater experience is perfect for this because, like we said, you know, the parts that, you know, made us go, ooh, like it was fun being in a crowd and the whole crowd having that response.
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement. I think it's one of those movies that for probably the first 30 to 40 minutes, it's slow, but very well done, to the point where it's like, it probably behooves you to see it in a movie theater just because if you were at home, you might be drifting towards your phone. But the latter half is so strong and, you know, completely makes good on like the theater experience and what a crowd reaction would be, that it's kind of like, yeah, I'm in complete agreement. I mean, it's a well done little indie horror movie. So yeah, I would give it a full recommendation. See that in the theater as well. So yeah, both of us were recommending it. And with that, I think it's time to cut to the spoiler discussion for Immaculate. We are now in our spoiler discussion for Immaculate. So if you've not seen Immaculate, it's time to tune out and come back once you've seen the movie, or keep listening if you simply don't care. Rowan, you know, it's kind of in the title. Immaculate. This winds up being a movie about immaculate conception, which I didn't know going into the movie. Obviously, it's kind of stupid not to know that, but once again, I never saw the trailer. I haven't heard the term immaculate really ever used in any other context other than, you know, the Virgin Mary, or like saying like, oh, something's perfect, it's immaculate. So I should have automatically known that coming in. But I will say that I think they do a pretty good job of the horror, I guess, in that moment of her figuring out that she's pregnant, but, you know, she's never been sexually involved with anybody. And I just thought it was a good little twist that kind of hits probably 30 minutes into the movie. I don't know if the twist for anybody who's seeing this movie, but for me, I enjoyed it. I thought it was I was like, okay, this is getting a lot more interesting now that, you know, our main character is pregnant, and then the movie's kind of structured through her trimesters for the rest of it.
Like you, I hadn't seen this trailer, so I went in, I did, Immaculate Conception. I kind of had put those together. But, I just kind of went in dub-minded in this, and I thought it was really well. Like I said in the spoiler-free section where I was like, this is really wearing that, like, Italian 70s horror on its sleeve. Like, you can obviously see the influences of, like, Rosemary's Baby and The Omen.
That's the biggest one in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think it's awesome just for the fact that these aren't necessarily movies that we get anymore, which is kind of funny to say because, we're saying that and then in 2 weeks we're literally going to see a prequel to The Omen.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I mean, other than, these next 2 weeks, this is kind of like a dead genre of like the Antichrist, especially like, with the nuns and the kind of cult nunnery going on. I don't know what you call nunnery. Stop your nunnery. Which the cult nuns I thought looked awesome with the red hoods going on, like the red pantyhose.
Or even like red masks, I think, at certain points, like coming over their face. Like it looked really, once again, I'm not Catholic. I have no idea if any of this shit is ceremonial. I have no idea if it's all made up. But when I was watching it, kind of what you were saying, like, essentially, like, the religion in this functions is almost like this lore or like this implicit like knowledge of the world that it's like this is what happens. So it's like, once again, I have no idea if there's a reason why a nun would ever have a red hood or wear a red mask, but in the movie it's just like it fits the world building so well, and then also just stands in as like a very good like horror detail that is just, I don't know, they were kind of in like lockstep with one another, that throughout the whole movie I just thought a lot of it really worked and, kind of built off of one another to really improve it. That's kind of going to one of the jump scares in the movie, which is, this is the one that got me, which, in hindsight, it's kind of silly, but I mean, we all can see a jump scare coming after we've already seen the movie. So it's when Cecilia, she's in the confessional booth and she's kind of confessing her sins and she looks through the other side and the father's not there in the confessional booth, or actually he's there, but he's in the distance, I think. And then the confessional booth starts stretching and stretching and stretching until it goes all dark and he vanishes. And it just holds on that for so long that obviously your eyes are kind of wandering like, okay, where's like the demon gonna appear out of this, scene, and it holds almost like unnaturally long that it was almost like, well, something's on the go here. And then it quick like smash cuts to hands grabbing her out of the back of the confessional booth, kind of like holding her down with weird red flashing neon lights, and like, all these like red masked nuns or whatever all like leaning over her and like stretching her face and contorting it in all these different ways, where I was just like, it was a really well done horror moment that I was just surprised like to see something like that in the movie. The last movie that hit that vibe was probably like when I watched House of the Devil years and years ago, where essentially there's a really crazy smash cut into that movie too that's pretty structured similarly, where it's a really quiet beat and then all of a sudden it goes like crazy. I think in that movie she's like strapped to like the floor and seeing in the middle of basically like some sort of ritual, and it was just something I thought was really well done. I'm bummed that they spoil it 5 seconds into the trailer, but as someone who never saw the trailer, I wasn't expecting it. I guess it's hands bursting through the confessional.
It worked for me, so
yeah, it was kind of like one of the first scares in the movie that felt like it went further than kind of like the logic of the world. Like so much of it up to this point were like scares that were structured like it's almost like the bump in the night sort of scares. Like, oh, there's someone at the door, there's a weird banging noise, or, oh, one of the old sisters is wandering around or whatever. You might see a scar on someone's foot, which I was hinted at in the spoiler free discussion. And all those are like little scares to kind of like set the tone. But this was like when the movie kind of like goes definitely like over the top, where I was like, damn, I wasn't expecting it to go like this. And then, of course, the third act is completely crazy over the top. So, yeah, no, I had to point out the confessional booth scare because it got me, which is, I don't know. It's funny. We do a lot of horror movie discussion on these shows, and It's rare that something like gets a good jump out of me, and this one did.
I mean, I my heart was racing pretty much before like the credits even finished at the beginning with the things, because I am super claustrophobic.
Yeah, I figured that was going to get you.
Yeah, and like I was like, oh Jesus. All I could think about was that Buried movie, Ryan Reynolds, which like that movie scares me more than anything on the planet. And I was just like, oh, this is terrible.
I think this scene is in the original Nun, though, is it? I don't know. It's been so long since I've seen that.
I don't know. I try to forget.
I think someone gets buried alive in that movie. And then for some reason in my head, they're like in the coffin and they like kind of look down towards their feet and they see something in the coffin with them. And then I think we go up above ground and they're like ringing the bell because they set up the bell. Like if someone's accidentally buried alive in that movie. So I don't know. I don't know if that's in the Nun or I just made it up.
No, it sounds
that's what I remember.
It's in something we watched, so it's probably the Nun. I'm sure they would do that. But to me, which is where I thought this was going, because like I said, I came into this thinking, all right, this is just going to be like a jump scare movie. So at first, instead of focusing on the claustrophobia of it all, I was just pissed because I'm like, oh, she's going to, flicker this light on, some stupid jump scare.
Big demon. Yeah, it's gonna
I'm
be
like,
there,
didn't I just see this in Insidious and, maybe The Nun or something else? But then they didn't do that. And I'm like, oh shit, no, like she's just in this box. I'm like,
buried alive.
Thanks a lot. Just, ruin my night. Yeah, like I thought that was super fantastic. You got me in like the first like 30 seconds. So obviously kudos to you.
Yeah, the rest of the kills in the movie, I mean, they're no slouch either. The one that kind of stood out to me the most was when sister, I think her name is like maybe Isabella or something. Anyways, it's the one that was supposed to be pregnant rather than Cecilia, Sydney Sweeney's character. She believed that she was divine. She throws herself off the roof.
Yeah.
And oftentimes in these sorts of movies, when someone throws themselves off the roof, you'll get like an overhead shot and you might see their legs are kind of, in a weird direction or something. And we'll cut away. Maybe you'll get a bit of blood kind of coming out from their head or something like that.
And usually they're yelling, "It's all for you, Damien." But unfortunately not in this one.
Not in this one, yeah. But this movie... They go so far that, like, basically Sydney Sweeney's character, Cecilia, she, like, walks up to the woman and sees her whole head, like, her whole face is, like, peeled off and her eyes are still moving a little bit. And someone, like, remarks who it is, like, someone knows it's that sister from looking at this mangled face. And I was just like, man, this sort of shit reminds me of, like, Midsummer. Like, when the old people throw themselves off the cliff in Midsummer, I was just like, man, I wasn't expecting that coming into this movie. And... some of the kills later in the movie are, I don't know if they're quite that graphic, but they're still very graphic that I was shocked.
You should have known better. It's Neon. So I feel, there's just this internal war of, Neon's like, hey, A24, hold my beer for a second so I can try to one-up you or at least match you.
They are definitely dueling, both trying to be like that cinephile, cool brand. For sure. Like, I'm still repping my A24 t-shirts quite literally as we record this. But, I might have to throw a Neon t-shirt or two in the closet,
Salute to them. And I love, you're talking about Isabel jumping off the roof. Like, I also love the shot because, it's literally just in the background. It's not even focused of her jumping, which to me, I was just like, yes, like, give me all this, like, because it makes it even more horrifying that it's like, oh, I kind of see something just falling and then
casual,
just real casual where, like I said, if this was Blumhouse and,
you'd be up on the roof with her, the music would be swelling, you'd have a cut of her face and she's crying and then she'd probably scream. And
that's right. And she's like, oh,
cut away right before she hits the ground.
That pool below me will catch me. And Night Swim 2 comes onto the screen.
Night Swim's definitely going to come up when we discuss Ghostbusters, but I'll leave it at that for now. What do you think of some of the other kills? I mean, I know we're just being disgusting, just talking about the kills in the movie, but for me, like, the crucifix one was insane, where she was bludgeoning, kind of
loved it.
I want to say Reverend Mother, but I think that's from Dune. I don't know, but like the mother in charge, where she's like bludgeoning her with the crucifix. I was like, God, the good Christian boy in me is squirming at this. This is so sacrilegious. And then she strangles the father with the rosary beads, which I will say for me was like the one of probably like the third act where she's kind of going over the top and murdering a bunch of people was the one that just kind of felt like, I don't know, lackluster to me, I guess, that one in particular.
I was kind of hoping that she was going to, like, somehow get him over the ledge so he'd, like, fall in the middle of this, like, praying session or something, or...
Yeah, I mean, that would have been cooler, I think, as well. It was one of those things where it's like, oh, look, even the head priest is smoking. He's not a godly man. And then, Cecilia comes up with the rosary beads and strangles him. And I was just like, all right, that one was, like, just a bit goofy, whatever. But, then we got, like, the one priest getting burned alive and then surviving, which is just this gnarly scene, chasing her through the catacombs. I forgot to mention her friend, when we follow in the middle of the night.
Oh, that was a great scene.
Yeah, that was like very like folk horror to me, kind of like following the screaming / the chanting, like kind of like into the night, and then finding like this little keyhole essentially to like view in and see, your friend get her tongue cut off.
Which we don't shy away from. We watch the tongue get like severed.
Yes, it comes off. Yeah, and they like got this apparatus to keep her mouth open and all this stuff, and it's just, there's some gnarly stuff in this movie. And then, of course, she finds her friend's corpse in the catacombs later on in the movie, like that very one that got her tongue cut off. That, I don't know, it was just, once again, everything in the movie, I will say all the plot beats, you can tell from a mile away, but as I was watching it, I was just still very much, like, into the movie. I was very much like, oh, okay, I know this is probably going to happen, but I was surprised. And then the ending in particular very much surprised me how far it went. Should we just get right into that?
Yeah, I mean, that's what anyone that's seen this movie is like, get to it, start talking about it.
So I'll start with a tweet that I saw online, which Michael Mohan responded to. And someone said, during the final scene of Immaculate, I'm pretty sure a girl in the front few rows of my screening threw up. If that isn't enough of a ringing endorsement, the film is also pretty damn great. And Michael Mohan responded, mission accomplished, ? And this is a gnarly ending. Like, obviously, we're not women. We've never gone through the pain of delivering a child. But in this scene, like, Sydney Sweeney just, like, leaves it all on the field. She just is over the top. It's basically this oneer where in the beginning of the oneer, she is just, like, in pain, soaked in blood all over her face from, murdering a priest with the literal nail of that crucified Jesus, stabbing him through the throat, to delivering this baby, which is very clearly, we can tell from like the breathing.
The sound works amazing.
The sound is amazing. You can tell like, okay, this isn't a baby, whatever she just delivered.
Yeah, it's got like an animalistic type of like growling, breathing.
Grunting, growly, like very much like this pained breathing. And it's kind of like it's all just sold from Sydney Sweeney's like reactions. And it's essentially, it's not even like a shocked reaction. It's basically just like she knew this was going to happen reaction. It's almost like a disappointed reaction of like, well, now I know what I got to do. And we follow her as she goes and like takes this rock off a nearby well and then eventually just smashes it down on what she just delivered. Oh, I forgot. She also bites off her own umbilical cord.
Oh, yeah.
Which in my screen, a guy just started cackling. Like he was just laughing up a storm. But it's a horrific scene. It's like, it's probably a minute or two long and it's the ending of the movie. And it's just like, she goes from delivering this, baby, this creature essentially to, basically making peace with that she has to kill it and does so like all in this one scene. And I just thought it was an excellent scene. It's gonna piss off a lot of people, but I was just like, this is a ballsy scene for a horror movie, and that's what horror movies are supposed to do.
100%, and it was so genius. Like we kind of get an outline of whatever the being is, but we never see it. It's entirely it's got that gonzo shooting of right on her face. We're only seeing her face, and that's pretty much it.
You see kind of like this blurred out infant-sized kind of blob on the back that like might be darker tinged in color than you'd expect, kind of like a darker blackish gray color is all you see. You never get a close-up of it or anything.
Even though we're at the end of the film, I was like Sydney and Mohan are not here to play. And a little fun fact, because we're talking about this all like a one-shot scene. Michael Mohan saying that not only is this a one-shot scene, this is a first take scene. They did one take. That was it. You're seeing the
It doesn't surprise me,
take.
dude. It's such like an I'm going to say over the top performance, but I just mean that it's a very like emotionally exhausting performance that Sydney Sweeney has to give here. And then basically to change from basically being in the pain of childbirth to realizing what you just birthed, to making the decision all insularly, never said anything out loud, to like, I gotta kill this, all in the same scene. It's a very much a complicated scene that she completely nails. I mean, if she screwed up this scene, or if it was too silly, like the whole movie, like the ending would suck. But instead, all I've seen is people universally praising the movie. There's so many people that think this movie's too boring or too cliche, or just literally like, oh, I don't like these aspects of it. It's basically universal praise for the ending that I've seen, and the few people I've seen angry about it are people that are just pissed off at it. More of like the context of it, where essentially like
they wouldn't kill the Antichrist. They
well,
wouldn't
that's
have
the
the
thing
willpower.
too. Yeah, like probably the one narrative beat in the whole movie that doesn't work for me is the revelation that basically what Sydney Sweeney is impregnated with is a fetus that is created from the actual literal cells of Jesus Christ, where they got, the genetic material off one of the nails that, crucified him. I will say that detail I probably didn't need. I think the movie is probably slightly stronger if it's left a little bit more up to the imagination. But then I guess you also don't get like the mustache twirling reveal of how evil this priest is, I guess. But it was something for me that I think was just a slight bridge too far. It was a little bit too goofy, I think. I don't know how you felt about it. Maybe with the 70s.
Yeah, I kind of liked it because it made them even more nefarious. I mean, we didn't mention, there's not a lot to talk about, but I really enjoyed like the priest sidekick who's like quite obviously like fashioned as like a Nazi, essentially, like the little Hitler mustache going, and he's like tall, sleek, he's got like, even though he's a priest, it's like this very militaristic like styling going on, where like he's just there to torture, he's just there to put hot things on your feet. We got a little Tarantino in the film going on, but But yeah, like I thought it worked just because I was like, yeah, this is, to me, that was even more of a nod to 70s Italian horror movies where we're just like, what the fuck? Like, this is just like going insane, and I'm all for it.
Yeah, like I said, maybe if I got a little bit more of a camp vibe from the movie that you did, maybe be something that would just fit in theme. But for me, for a lot of it, I just thought it was a pretty buttoned up religious horror movie that, obviously I understand if you're not like brought up in a religious background, all this shit sounds crazy to you, right? Like all these things they're espousing or these Bible verses, obviously they're completely foreign and they're just wild, and probably a lot of them do sound really silly. It's just as someone who was, brought up with a lot of that kind of in the periphery, it was like, yeah, it kind of fits what they're talking about, essentially, it wasn't something that I instantly took as camp. I guess the one last thing I'll very quickly mention before we get on to scoring this is just, I do think the movie may have been slightly stronger if it was a period piece. And I will say there's just one moment where I think it's a very clever moment in the movie where essentially we bring back the fact that Cecilia couldn't kill a chicken earlier in the movie, and basically she just couldn't go through with, cutting its head off despite it being for sustenance. And basically she uses that to kind of pull the wool over the eyes of like, everyone in the nunnery, and essentially try and get medical assistance, right? And I like that scene and the revelation of like, obviously she killed the chicken and slathered herself in blood and all that sort of thing. But it was like, the whole scene hinges on a cell phone call to basically like get them to turn around. And I was just kind of like, is that the only reason this movie is modern? Like at all? Like I was thinking about it and I was just like, there's literally no reason for this movie to be set in 2024 or whatever, like other than this one phone call. This could have been literally set in the 70s or 80s, right? Like I'm not missing anything. Like, I think that's it, right?
I don't think so. I mean, obviously, I'm thinking they're driving like an 80s Mercedes. But I mean, it's obviously not the 80s just by the, size of his cell phone that he's using. So, I mean, it could be said now. To me, it didn't bug me as much just because I kind of thought it showed that, even if it's set now, like how isolating this place is like, oh, well, obviously, someone, this, priest has a cell phone, and like the higher up nun has access to the outside world, and
yeah.
2, modernized hospitals, and it's like she just has zero way to contact anyone.
Yeah, I like it as an isolating agent, I guess, and like that conceptually in the script, but I think I think there was probably just a way to get around like the cell phone access. I think basically not having access to an outside hospital or being very heavily persuaded not to seek outside medical attention is probably enough, as an isolating region, especially when she's literally just there for months on end. But it was just one small thing that I was just like, basically for so much of this movie, it feels like a period piece. Like every aspect of it, and then it's like, oh, a cell phone is whipped out as we're going into the third act, which is like, I understand that's set up right in the beginning of the movie too, with I think like the customs agents and whatnot. But it's just, it's a beat that to me, I was just like, I think it might have been stronger if we didn't, if it wasn't modern. But it's a minor slight. So with that, are we good to get into rating this?
Yeah, sure.
So if you're new to the podcast, our review rubric is nay, okay, yay, or slay. So Rowan, what would you give Immaculate?
I mean, get your fire extinguishers, because I'm coming in hot. I'm going slay. I'm going like
really.
I had so much fun. I didn't.
Oh my god.
I was expecting this to like maybe be an okay. I went in with like zero expectations. Like I said, if I did see the trailer, I don't remember seeing it. So I just went in and I was like, oh yeah, this is just going to be like, some pretty generic, basic horror movie that Sydney Sweeney did, I guess is, to kill time or something. And I came out of this just like smiles. I've never been happier to see a baby crushed by a rock in my life.
That's the pull quote. That's what you put on the poster.
To me, like I said, it was like this communal experience of everyone just like, in shock and awe at all the gross parts. We didn't even talk about like her pulling her fingernail off, real slowly. Yeah. Everybody was just like, like, oh my God. And like coming out of the theater, like, everybody was happy. You could tell like they were all talking about it. They couldn't believe the ending, what they had seen. And I was just like, what else can I ask for from a horror movie in the theater, but just in general? This is it. This is what I want. 100% slay. Colton,
wow.
You, what would you give this film?
Well, I'm not going to go to a slay. I think it's very good. It's a strong yay from me. I think for me, maybe it's just literally some technical things that were a part of my screening. It might not even be the actual movie itself, right? Like, because once again, the cinematography was so dark, I couldn't see like a lot of the detail in the movie, which was partially a vibe, but also partially a little bit annoying. And I do still think they made a couple of different creative choices. Just, I wish, for example, like Sydney Sweeney had a slightly different dialogue, or sorry, accent than what she has in the movie, or, maybe I would have preferred it as a period piece or something like that. But once again, these aren't actual, like, real issues with the movie too much. It's just enough that it's like, maybe on a second watch, I'd bump it up. But right now, I just think it's a very good horror movie. It was much better than I was expecting as well. I think the ending is gnarly. I think a lot of where it goes is just very well done, if not completely unique or completely, exciting. Like, it's just, once again, if you've seen a bunch of horror movies, you've probably seen this plot before. It's just, this was very well executed. And, I'm kind of with you, which I hope Sydney Sweeney kind of, puts a little bit more horror roles in her portfolio. She's a great final girl. She was excellent to follow for the last 20 minutes of this movie. So yeah, it's a very strong yay from me. I very much enjoyed it. And as we said, I mean, if you just listen to the whole spoiler discussion and haven't seen it, I would recommend that you go out and do so. And with that, it's time to move on to something potentially even spookier than the horrors of Catholicism. It's Ghostbusters time. Rowan, like I said, some probably 40 minutes ago, I know you've said in the past that you're a fan of Ghostbusters, but I don't think we've had much of a discussion on the rebooted iteration of the franchise. So I'm wondering if you enjoyed Ghostbusters Afterlife, and based on that, were you looking forward to Ghostbusters Frozen Empire? Did you get the Slimer popcorn bucket?
For so long, I thought the Slimer popcorn bucket was a real thing. Is it a real thing? I don't think. I think it's traps, isn't it?
Wait, like the Slimer?
I think the Slimer
big
is a
mouth
meme.
open?
I think it's a meme.
No, that's real. I saw it at the theater last night. There was a kid walking out with it.
They didn't have one.
Okay. No, that's real.
I like the ones I saw, like the AMC's in the States have the traps that open a door and the popcorn goes in.
Okay, no, I never saw that, but I'm pretty confident I saw a Slimer last night when I was leaving. Now I'm gonna have to Google. You're making me question.
Hopefully, some teenager didn't make a Slimer himself so he can have sex with it in the theater. I mean, that would just be kind of weird, and I wouldn't put it past anybody.
I mean, I'm seeing multiple Slimer popcorn buckets. If I'm speaking out of turn, I apologize.
Sorry, guys.
I'm pretty sure I saw one leaving the theater last night.
All right, and very well. I do know there had to be something because a guy ahead of me in the food line asked about a popcorn bucket, and I heard them say like, "Oh, only certain theaters get them." Like, we're a small town theater, like they don't ever send us. They're still selling the Marvel's popcorn buckets at my theater. So they're like, until you guys start buying some of these Marvel popcorn buckets, we're not getting anything
else.
They might even have Aquaman ones still left. I don't know. Oof. Like we're trying to get rid of popcorn buckets like crazy. I don't even know. I started talking about Slimer popcorn buckets. I don't even remember the questions.
Did you like Ghostbusters Afterlife? Were you looking forward to this one?
I'm such a big fan of Ghostbusters Afterlife that the first time I saw it was last night before I saw this.
Excellent.
I never saw the whatever year it was that they did like the all-female cast.
The 2016 one. That's because you're sexist, right?
I think so, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, I never saw it, which maybe I will sometime. I'm a really big Kristen Wiig person, so even if it's bad, like, I'll watch it.
It's pretty awful, what I will say. Like, but I think Kristen Wiig is one of the better parts of the movie for sure. For me, it was, I can't even remember her name now. Weird Barbie.
Oh, yeah, I know who you're talking about.
But yeah, she was the one that for me was like very annoying in that movie. But anyways, Afterlife.
Yeah, so I only saw it last night, so I don't know if I'm like the defining, critic on this one, but
you're not an expert on it.
Yeah, no expert. I actually liked it, and I wasn't expecting to like it. I heard some pretty divisive things about it that a lot of people I know that saw it were kind of like, well, if you're a big fan of the originals, you're probably not going to like it. And then I heard, people say, no, it's super good. It's super funny. And I thought it was, a pretty good what would we call it? Like a requel, I guess, in Scream terms.
Yeah, a reboot, a requel, a legacy sequel. Yeah, different names for it.
And I thought, because as high esteem as I hold Ghostbusters, I was telling Colton when I was texting him, like, Ghostbusters is in like my all-time, like 1 and 2, like. My earliest memories as a child were like I owned both of those on VHS. My family, I watched them all the time. Like I love Ghostbusters. And to me, this did what, the Afterlife did what it needed to do, which is bring, update it a bit for the kids, have some Easter eggs and nostalgia in there for people like me. And, I think maybe the general public thinks Ghostbusters a little more serious than it really is. Like, it was an 80s popcorn blockbuster movie. Like, it was a comedy. It wasn't anything hardcore. It was light. It was fun. And I think Afterlife kind of accomplished that goal of it. What about you? Were you a Afterlife hater or lover? Or
no? What I'll say is I'm not a big Ghostbusters fan. I've seen the 2016 one, and I've seen the original movie. I've never seen like Ghostbusters 2, I've only seen both of those once. Right, so I'm not a big Ghostbusters guy, but what I will say is I really enjoyed Ghostbusters Afterlife, so much so that one time on set when the guys I was working with were going through my letterbox, I'm one of those people that I spend a lot of time deliberating on what star rating I'm going to give a movie, and I was like, I can defend any movie that you guys point out. Like I've spent enough time, I've thought about it, and the one time they roasted me on it, like just they wouldn't stop, was that I gave Ghostbusters Afterlife a 4 stars. So I stand by it. I still think it's a very good movie. I will admit
I give it a 4. So
yeah, maybe it's one of those that like at the end of it, it's a little bit like emotionally manipulative. Maybe that it's just kind of like, I think that was shortly after like Harold Ramis died or whatever when I was watching it. but I very much enjoyed it. I think it did a good job of modernizing the franchise. I do think it's not quite like on theme with the previous movies. Like, it's not really a comedy. It's closer to something like a Stranger Things, or it has like the reference to the previous film, something like a Star Wars The Force Awakens did, right? Where it's like everything is important, everything needs to be given like its own musical cue and a close-up, and we got to shoot it in slow motion and stuff. All this shit's important. But like, once again, as someone who didn't have too much reverence for Ghostbusters, I was like, okay, yeah, it all works for me. I very much enjoyed it. I liked the new cast. I liked all the new dynamics. I thought it was just a fun movie. I very much enjoyed it. So yeah, with that, I was looking forward to Ghostbusters Frozen Empire as well. And yeah, I think I wound up seeing like King Richard the same day as Ghostbusters Afterlife, and I think I may have been more emotionally affected by Ghostbusters Afterlife. I still like King Richard, but like that's very much like an Oscar bait sort of movie, and I'm very kind of tearing up at Ghostbusters Afterlife. So yeah, dude, I very much enjoyed that original movie, or that reboot.
No one brings the heat like Paul Rudd, so
he's great. And with that, so did Bustin' make us feel good? Well, before we get into that, let's throw it on over to the trailer.
The city is under siege by an army of ghosts. We're gonna need more firepower.
Can I be of any help?
Aren't you retired?
Grab your juice boxes.
New York is only the beginning.
What would you have done back in the day?
I'd have showered and shaved and hit the clubs.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Ghostbusters, March 22nd.
What you just heard is from Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, directed by Gil Kennan and written by Gil Kennan and Jason Reitman. And the story is as follows. When the discovery of an ancient artifact unleashes an evil force upon New York City, Ghostbusters new and old must band together to protect their home and potentially the world from a second ice age. Now, here on Now Slang, we like to keep things relatively spoiler-free up front before getting into the more spoiler-filled discussion. So, Rowan, what are your spoiler-free thoughts on Ghostbusters Frozen Empire?
You know what? I think this film does what it needed to do. Like I said, my biggest issue with a lot of the complaints about the new stuff is that I think people are taking Ghostbusters way too serious. And I think one of the most dangerous things, which very well could happen with what is obviously a franchise now, is, the Marvelification of this IP, which is taking itself too serious and setting things up that everything is just kind of the setup for the next thing, where I thought this was a pretty good time. It was light. There was a lot of different people in my screenings, from people my age to people with kids. That this might be their first Ghostbusters experience. And, I think it worked. If this is going to be a franchise, I think it's light. I thought there was some great ghosts in this. We'll get into more of what they were, but to me, the ghosts were pretty on par. If you're a fan of the original, some of them are wacky, some of them are creepy. I thought this had some interesting nods, specifically to Ghostbusters 2, which I thought was interesting because the first one, Afterlife, gave all the nods to the original Ghostbusters film, and they were smart enough to show the second one, which, might be my favorite out of the original two, a lot of love in this one.
Yeah, you'll have to tell me about it a little bit more in the spoiler-filled discussion. I think there was a reference to the Statue of Liberty, but other than that, it went over my head.
A lot of references, and just like what I thought they did really well with Afterlife is, I thought the comedy worked in it. I thought the action worked in it. I just think it, like I said, I think this is what you kind of want in a popcorn movie, is I came out, I wasn't disappointed. I also wasn't oh man, I got to make sure I memorize everything in this, because in, film number 7, they might come back to this, and I'll have to remember that this guy from this planet has this superpower, and Another big thing that I thought was interesting is a couple nods to the cartoon, which is really a nostalgia thing. That came out like I think late 80s, early 90s, which like notoriously is like very hard to find because the cartoon actually isn't owned by the same company as the movies, which is why the cartoon is called The Real Ghostbusters.
Gotcha.
So I thought like there was lots of interesting nods, and like I just think for like kind of this legacy sequel, they did the best they could in the times that we are in. What about yourself, Colton?
I don't think they did the best they could in the times that we're in. But before I get into kind of like dunking on this movie too much, I gotta mention my theater experience, which I mentioned when we were talking about Immaculate that was far more packed than my Ghostbusters. I had maybe a dozen, maybe 15 people in the movie, most of which were of the age to have clearly have seen the movie when they were a kid, like the original Ghostbusters. Like I'm talking about the big, hefty guys, nice. That are probably like late 40s.
It was just me there.
Yeah, it was essentially Rowan if you had a few more years to yourself, right? It was very much like that comic book nerd, like neckbeard vibe is what a lot of the theater was. And what I will say is they weren't really reacting to the movie at all when it was on. This was just literally like as if they were watching paint dry for most of it. And the only other people in the movie I noticed, outside of that one person with the Slimer popcorn bucket when I was leaving, was what I would say is probably a first date for a couple that was right around my age, and they were sat like there was one empty seat in between us, and basically the dude was just mansplaining all of the Ghostbusters lore to the girl the entire movie. He didn't shut up. Every single detail, every little reference, who this person was, why they're relevant. Clearly she's never seen a Ghostbusters movie or watched Afterlife, and it was the sort of thing where I wanted to say something, but I was also so checked out of the movie that I just didn't care. So yeah, the guy was just explaining the whole movie to me. But that's not all. I don't know if you got this beforehand, but my Ghostbusters Afterlife experience started with like a 3 or 4 minute trailer for this anime movie called Spy Family Code White. I don't know why this irritated me so much, but I watched this movie in IMAX. So I had this like 100-foot tall screaming pink-haired anime girl just like freaking out for 3 minutes as the movie was starting. And I'm not an anime guy. Maybe if you're an anime guy, you'd enjoy this, but I was just literally like, I was like annoyed before the movie even started that I was just like, oh no, this is gonna be a rough set. So yeah, it's something that basically I'm not even gonna lie. The opening credits, I can tell that they weren't properly comped into the movie. You could see like all the jagginess around all the letters, like the PNGs weren't properly rendered, and I was just like, okay, obviously it's a very minor thing. A lot of people don't care about the opening credits of the movie, but I was just like, this is a big budget movie, right? And as I was watching it, I just kept feeling like, man, all these VFX look really bad. Or like, oh, geez, the lighting here is completely off. Or it's like, that character, I can tell 100% wasn't in this shot of the movie. Like, they just comped him in. He's a completely different color and might not even be in the focus of this shot. And it's insane. There was so much, like, when I was watching the movie that I was surprised by how sloppy it all was.
There
and
was
maybe
some
it's been
egregious ADR too in this.
There was, yes. And I mean, there is a bit of ADR in the original Ghostbusters, so maybe they'd be like, oh, that's a reference or an homage. It's like, nah, you're not getting away with it in this movie. I mean, I got loads of things to go on. I don't know.
Please.
All right. Kumail Nanjiani. I used to love this guy. I used to think he was so charismatic, so easy to watch, so fun, just this like goofy, entertaining guy. And now for whatever reason, when I see him in movies, he's just like this charisma black hole. I see him in this movie and I'm just like, he looks miserable. He looks like he doesn't want to be here. And my only real rationale for it is I'm just wondering if the steroids he had to take for the Eternals like broke his spirit, if they like erased his personality, because they got him in like this oversized sweater the whole movie to kind of, discount if he's still like ripped or buff or anymore, because his character wouldn't really be so. And it was very weird. When I saw him in this movie, I was just like, he looks miserable to be in this movie, and it's also miserable for me watching him. Are you still a big Kumail Nanjiani guy? Have you ever been, I guess, is another question. Yeah.
I've enjoyed him and stuff. I'm not like, I'm kind of give or take with him. I thought he was fine in this. Like, the grandmom stuff. Like, there was stuff that, like, my audience all laughed at. And
okay.
It was good for, like, a cheap laugh, I guess. I mean, like I said, I think, I think the hard thing with this, and maybe is the difference between you and me, is I was, like, really grading it on all the other IP that I've watched in the last, like, 3 years. So I was just kind of like, I don't know, like it's another IP movie.
So for me, this is like marginally better than Madam Web. Marginally. So that's the thing. It's like,
no.
and we went on like a 10-minute, rant about how bad Madam Web was. When I was watching this, I enjoyed it less than Madam Web. Now, was this a more competent movie? 100%, but it was very much like this. This was just a miserable experience for me. I can go on. Logan Kim. I'm gonna dub him kind of like the Ke Huy Quan effect, where essentially when Ke Huy Quan was like coming up in Hollywood, he was getting cast as kind of like the excitative little like Asian kid, like the sidekick who's a little bit nerdy. And Logan Kim, it's been a while since I've seen the original movie, but I kind of felt like he fit that role in the original movie, that he was like, oh, he's the little like nerdy techie kid, like very excitative. And in this, like obviously the kid has hit puberty, he's aging in between movies. But I just felt like that whole like shtick wasn't in this movie at all. I felt like he was almost like too cool for the role that he was cast in, and he was never directed to be anything else. So when I was watching it, I was like, damn, I remember liking Podcast in the original movie because that's a silly name, that's his, Ghostbusters name. And then when I saw him in this, I was just like, once again, I was like, he's just not hitting. Like he's not doing really anything in the movie. And then that's similar to there's another character that, gosh, I forget.
Celeste O'Connor. Yes, I thought the same, yeah.
Yeah, she completely gets relegated to like a tertiary role. Like it's not even close to like main cast anymore. And instead, they bump up fucking Dan Aykroyd. I'm like,
they know what the people want, man.
I'm like, I don't want Dan Aykroyd in every scene of this movie. I don't want him as like essentially the lead, and he's not quite lead, but he's probably in the top 5 or 6 for screen time for sure. The dude is like literally in almost every scene of this movie in like the background or something, he might not have a speaking role, but I'm just like, why is Dan Aykroyd in this movie so much?
Well, I'm curious. I'd have to look into it more. And I'm trying to think of like interviews, stuff I've listened to, but there's got to be a financial part to that. Cause I'm pretty sure Dan Aykroyd owns a huge chunk of the copyright to Ghostbusters.
And that's fine, but like he was present in the first movie, as like kind of like the expert they check in with from time to time. And I'm fine with that, but like having the dude on screen all the time,
this is what he wants.
Baffling.
This is what Dan Aykroyd wants.
It's not what I want.
I know.
I don't want it.
It might not be what anyone else wants, but I mean, even after Afterlife, I remember like him saying like if they greenlight us, like we would come back, the original cast, and do our own movie. Like he's always pushed about that they could still at their age do a movie. A Ghostbusters film.
They couldn't. And I mean, the thing is like, it's not a spoiler to say Bill Murray's in this movie, right? Like he's in the trailer. Like obviously the original cast are back, outside of Harold Ramis. But it was very much to me, I was like, even Bill Murray, he seemed like extra miserable to be in this movie.
He did.
Like I understand that's kind of his shtick, to be like grumpy old man now, like he doesn't want to be there, but like there was like no joy. I'm thinking back to like, who's a notoriously difficult actor to work with? Like Harrison Ford.
Yeah.
When he came back for The Force Awakens, when he was playing Han Solo for the first time in like 40 years, there was like light in his eyes. He was like excited to be there. Now, once you go into the further movies and that, when he has to come back in The Rise of Skywalker, he's phoning it in, hates to be there as well. But that was the vibe I got from Bill Murray in this movie. That he didn't want to be there. That like he was almost like contractually obligated to be there. And I think he has the best line of the movie, which is also like, kind of, it's like, that's a really good like Bill Murray line. What is it? It's like, tall, dark, and horny, 12 o'clock or whatever. You know, that's the only line in the whole movie I thought was kind of funny, and I've heard it half a dozen times in the trailer over the past, 3 or 4 months.
I mean, he definitely doesn't want to be in it. He didn't want to be in Ghostbusters 2, so he's notoriously not wanted to continue on with this. If this wasn't like a franchise that he enjoyed necessarily doing, so...
Well, yeah, like imagine if they did a Ghostbusters 3 with just the old guard. Like, Bill Murray, who doesn't want to be there, Dan Aykroyd, who wants to eat up every single minute of screen time, Ernie Hudson, who's, he seems fine in the movie. Like, he's not terrible or anything, but
he's doing what you want Dan Aykroyd to do. Like, he's kind of like overseeing,
He's in the periphery. He comes up every now and then. He's like, oh, I own real estate, essentially. I'm like, yeah, sure, cool. I don't need you to be
enjoy
like,
your retirement,
in a proton pack the entire movie. I don't know, dude. What was baffling to me was when I was watching this movie once again, I just found like everything fundamentally didn't work to me. But I was like, who is Gil Kennan? Who is this guy? And I looked into it afterwards and was like, okay, cool. He directed Monster House. I think Monster House is pretty good. It's a good like children's like horror movie. Then I look into it. I'm like, okay, he was one of the writers on Afterlife, which once again, I like, I've done a lot of screenwriting in my time, nothing produced, but it's like, I can respect that. But then I'm like, okay, but for directing A Boy Called Christmas? I'm like, I've never even heard of this movie. I don't know what it is. And I don't know how he goes from that, like directing like, I don't know, this Netflix Christmas movie that I'm a huge film buff and I've never heard tell of, to like probably like the $200 million Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. Okay, it's $100 million, but still it's a big movie, It's just like, I was like, who is this guy? How did he get this gig?
No one knows, man. He obviously he must have had some deal when he was writing the Afterlife.
When he was writing, it's probably like Reitman probably, spoke up and said like, hey, this guy knows what he's doing or something. Like, sure, but like, I don't know, man. When I was watching this, it's just like everything felt so misdirected. Everything felt like bad decisions. Everything was just, I want to get into the Phoebe stuff, but I can't get into it here. That's like one of the only spoiler-filled things I can think of discussing. But I think it's also poorly handled. I think it's terrible how they relegate basically all the interesting characters that they built up in the first movie to like the bench or kind of write them off. They basically ruin most of them. They make Paul Rudd the star of the movie, which is like, I like Paul Rudd. I think we even said like, oh, the more Paul Rudd, the better. But like, I don't know if I need him being like the lead. He's even like, he gets like the emotional arc of the movie, Paul Rudd.
Where the movie really failed was the fact that Afterlife was successful because the kids were likable, and I was okay with them passing the torch on to these kids, and I'm like, sure, I'll watch 10 movies about these kids like fighting ghosts, like whatever, exactly. That kills an afternoon. But like you said, this was obviously, they wanted to, get before these guys start croaking, they wanted, to make sure, let's basically try to make Ghostbusters 3 and, get as much as the original cast as we can to, do their thing.
And if that's the thing, it's kind of like, sure, I understand what you're trying to do, but then it's like, why did you bring in Kumail Nanjiani? Why did you bring in Emily Allen Lind as, Melody? Why did you bring in that other random guy that I can't remember his name right now, and I don't have him listed here, but he's like the tall, geeky guy with the glasses, the like, why are you just bloating? Like there's like a dozen Ghostbusters in this movie. I don't need that. I don't want that. So it was just, everything to me, I just thought was a baffling decision. I very much didn't enjoy this movie remotely. I would not recommend you go see it. Rowan, would you recommend it? You're obviously more positive on it. It's just I'm very much holding back because I don't want to spoil anything.
I think you could wait till this comes to Netflix. I will say, like, I don't know, if you have like kids or something, sure. I mean, like I said, there was a lot of kids. There was a lot of kids in my viewing that were pumped to see this. And, to me, Ghostbusters is a very family-friendly gateway drug in the ghosts. So, maybe this will get them on the ghosts and horror kick. I'd rather you just show them the original, really. That has more horror gateway in it than this. This has a lot more to do with, like I said, Marvel than it does like this quirky 80s comedy franchise. So you know what? I'll agree with you. Like, overall, like, no, I wouldn't recommend you seeing this, especially in the theater.
Yeah, I guess if you're one of those people that you're listening to this podcast right now and you're like screaming at me that I don't get Ghostbusters or like I'm wrong, it's like, and you're just fired up about Ghostbusters, well then obviously you've probably already seen the movie already. But if you're that defensive over Ghostbusters, just go see it. But yeah, as someone who's not a fan, I have no nostalgia for the franchise. This was just a miserable sit. And that's the thing. It's like, I'm not joking when I say I would probably prefer to watch Night Swim again. And the reason why is like Night Swim's like 90 minutes or whatever. This was like, I think it was almost 2 hours, and it was way too long for just how uninteresting it was overall. So yeah, I mean, neither of us are going to recommend this one. And with that, I think it's time to cut to the spoiler discussion for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. We are now in our spoiler discussion for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, so if you've not seen Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, it's time to tune out and come back once you've seen the movie, or keep listening if you simply don't care. Rowan, I don't think there is a lot of stuff to spoil in this movie. The main thing I probably want to discuss is the McKenna Grace, Emily Allen Lind kind of romance, flirt, tiptoeing around that I think they completely butcher and ruin and mishandle in every single regard. But is there something else that you want to discuss?
Let's start with that, because yeah, it was handled so poorly that I was cringing in the theater, and I was like, well, am I at a Disney movie? What's going on here?
And yeah, once again, not like cringing from like that cute like embarrassment of like, oh, people trying to feel out if they like one another or whatnot that you get sometimes from rom-coms or from YA movies, young adult movies. This was just like, I just thought everything was so mishandled. It was just so poorly done. Like, I don't mind this idea conceptually, like of like McKenna Grace as Phoebe kind of being pushed from her family a little bit because of, oh, you're not old enough to be a Ghostbuster. Very strange that they make it like the mayor ordering her not to be a Ghostbuster rather than just like, you're grounded, you can't be a Ghostbuster for the time being or something. Like, basically attributing that decision to like an outside entity rather than like a familial issue, I thought was a weird decision right away.
Well, shout out to William Atherton, though, who also, he plays the mayor's assistant in Ghostbusters 1 and 2.
Of course.
Yeah.
Means nothing to me. He's terrible in this movie. I don't care who he is. But when I was watching it, I was like, oh yeah, I'm sure this guy was probably in the original ones. But in this framework, I'm fine with basically Phoebe getting pushed away from her family and like turning to the outside world and trying to find, a place where she fits. I like that conceptually. I even like her meeting Melody and developing a sort of kinship. But where I think what they should have done is you should have presented Melody as like another kid who's not a ghost up front. Basically develop this like friendship. They meet a couple of times where it's like, oh, will they, won't they? Are they romantically involved? Maybe when she leans in for her first kiss, her lips go through or something, it's this goofy moment, but it's revealed then that Melody is a ghost. And that's where you can kind of basically be like, oh, well, what does this mean for their relationship? Was this all a ploy? Does Melody have these, ulterior motives? What is this? Because then there's an inherent drama to what is going on. There's inherent stakes. We care about these characters and if they're going to be together. And it's not just all happening out of the blue. Like, literally how it just happens is like McKenna Grace, Phoebe is just sitting down in a park to play chess by herself, which is what loads of people do. And all of a sudden the chess pieces just start moving by herself and like a big blue ghost on fire comes out. And I was just like, okay, it's just... to me, it's just not how I develop a romance in a movie.
Well, I kind of wonder, did you think that she thought her grandfather was going to play, since in Afterlife, that was like their theme, was playing chess?
Well, see, it's been so long since I've seen Afterlife that I never knew about that detail. So yeah, if that was what they were going for, it's slightly better handled. But still, it's literally like, I don't like it as the introduction to this Melody character.
Well, how many people is Melody playing chess with? She said she had lots of time to practice, but obviously she doesn't have the chess pieces, so other people had to show up, and she had to play chess. So by her logic, she's playing chess with lots of people that are showing up in this park by themselves.
That's a good detail. I never thought about it that hard, and I don't think the filmmakers thought about it that hard either. But yeah, I don't know. It was just something where I didn't feel like the characters really cared about each other much. And you kind of do have to buy into this romance, I think, for the third act to really hit for you. Because basically there's two emotional keys to this movie. It's Paul Rudd not knowing if he's part of the family because he's the stepfather and he doesn't know, like, if he has agency over, like, reprimanding the kids, like disciplining them. But also he's not sure if they really love him and care about him as a stepfather. And then the next one is McKenna Grace no longer being a Ghostbuster, despite her very much wanting to be one, and basically trying to figure out what she's going to do with her life now that she's no longer a Ghostbuster. Those are kind of the emotional cores of the movie. And obviously they both come to a head in the third act, like any screenwriting structure at all. But for me, I was just like, I don't really care about either of these. We all know that Paul Rudd's eventually, by the end of the movie, he's going to basically be like, oh, okay, yeah, they do care about me. Like, we all know that'd be what a weird message if the movie ended and they're like, you're just my stepdad, I don't care about you. Can you imagine, like, if they went that direction? It'd be so crazy. And then the other one is just like, you have to buy into Melody essentially betraying this omnipotent, like, ghost god with big old horns, and, you know, he's ushering in another ice age. You have to buy into her kind of, I don't know, almost like loving Phoebe enough to, like, save her and, like, you know, fulfill, like, the Firekeeper prophecy and all this horse shit. And I was just like, I wasn't feeling it. I was just like, none of this feels authentic or, like, well developed to me.
To me, this screamed like studio interference because, like you said, to me, to buy it, there should have been more developed between Phoebe and Melody. I mean, it obviously was written and meant as, you know, like an actual love interest relationship. And this screamed to me like the studio being like, yeah, no, we're not gonna do any of that same sex stuff here. Cause, like, we brush on it, we get, like, the hints to it, but, like, anytime it's kind of, you're like, oh, okay, now it's gonna, you know, they're gonna kind of really develop feelings for each other. It's like, no, we're not gonna do that.
Yeah, that's the thing with the movie where, to me, I found it was pretty explicit, but you are right that I guess we don't see them kiss or we don't see them, like, hold hands or anything like that, I guess. But it was just like, once again, the language is there. If you have someone, like, any other movie, if someone was, like, coming to this teenage girl's home in the middle of the night and, like, knocking on the window to come inside into their bedroom, it's like we would automatically assume there's a romantic interest there.
Yeah,
this
I've
movie
seen
doesn't
Twilight,
explicitly.
So
yeah, exactly. You know, and it's just like this movie. Yeah, I guess you're right that they don't explicitly say it. Well, that's even worse to me because that's the thing. It's like obviously that's what they're setting up here. You know, the character is like nerdy and kind of like awkward. You know, even the way she dresses is like kind of lesbian coded to a certain degree, like Phoebe's character. That it's just like I don't really understand what they were going in this direction. That's even more, you know, confounding to me. Like that, I guess it wasn't explicit in the movie, but I just thought it was so obvious that's what they were doing.
Like I said, a huge misstep. I do want to say something that's not a misstep. The finally return of Slimer. Who any Ghostbuster fan, just fantastic. I love a good slime.
I think he gets slimed a few too many times in this movie. You know, there is almost like this subplot of Finn Wolfhard trying to figure out how to capture Slimer by himself and like setting up the Cheetos a couple of times, getting slimed multiple times and all this stuff that I thought was, I don't know. I guess I'm fine with Slimer, but to me,
well, this is where I thought, because, you know, especially where we had, you know, Lucky donning, you know, she had the red Ghostbuster suit going on, which to me is like, that was the obvious nod to the cartoons, which they did wear different color suits every once in a while. And I believe like red or dark, you know, maroon was one of them. This is where I thought they were going to kind of go. They didn't end up going there because, of course, in the cartoon, like Slimer is like a buddy. Like he like rides with the Ghostbuster.
Friend,
yeah. So, and I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. Like, you know, paying fan service to like, you know, this cult classic cartoon of, you know, people my age's age. Yeah, you know, I think we could have got more that was not just a slime gag every, like, you know, time we see him.
Yeah, I think it happens 2, maybe even 3 times in the movie, like the slime gag. So it's just like, it's overplayed. I kind of do like if they were trying to develop him as like a pet or like a an equal in the movie, and like maybe Finn Wolfhard was like feeding him Cheetos and Slimer was warming up to him a little bit more. I think I would have preferred that, because what we get in the movie instead, it just seems like a repeated beat of just the slime gag over and over again as like Trevor tries to figure out how to capture Slimer. And I don't think he captures Slimer.
No, Slimer does leave.
Slimes away
Yeah.
each time. Yeah. So it's like just a waste of time. It's basically just fan service. That's all it is. Multiple scenes of Slimer fan service.
Yeah, and there was other things that I thought, I guess, were heartwarming for a Ghostbusters fan. Like, I will say, as much as I do agree that there was way too much Dan Aykroyd in this, I do love, as a personal note, like, you could just see how pumped Dan Aykroyd is, like, to be in this movie, like, talking about ghost busting, like, the light in his eyes is always fantastic. It was in Afterlife also that, like, he gets to revisit this character all these years later. And like we said, unlike Bill Murray, who just didn't give a shit. Although I did like they had him rocking the sweater when he first shows up to the fire station, which is like kind of his iconic sweater he wears when he's just getting drunk in public with random people in his normal life. That's like,
oh, really?
Yeah, it's that like orangish sweater he just always has on.
Maybe he just wandered in after a bender.
Maybe.
Like, all right, he's here. Let's get it.
I'm sure the booze he finds in the firehouse, like, that was probably part of his like contract. He's like, there has to be booze everywhere. I might pull it out on set, I might not. Just make sure it's there.
There was a shot with him like in the third act, I think, where they kind of turn around after Phoebe's like unfrozen. I'm pretty sure he wasn't there. I don't think he was there. Like, maybe he was there partially that day, to do the whole like hero shot of him holding the proton pack and firing it and stuff. But I don't think he was there the whole day, like while they were shooting all that out. It felt very much like they shot him against a blue screen and then comped him in. Because he was also doing like a repeated thing where like he was just like kind of looking around and like not looking at like what was happening at all. He was just very awkward on like the edge, like left of the screen, furthest to the left, like kind of almost pushed out of it, just awkwardly standing there, where it's like, once again, I'm not a huge Ghostbusters fan, but I know Venkman is, an important part of those movies, obviously, right? So it's just strange to have him like almost pushed out of screen. I'm watching a poorly comped in Bill Murray in IMAX, He's 30 feet tall over there to the left,
Maybe this is the time. Do we want to talk about the villain? And
I hated all this.
I guess just how it so goes. Much. Did you?
Kumail Nanjiani's involvement. I was like watching this and I was like, this isn't what I want in my Ghostbusters movie. I understand there is like always this weird artifact or Zool or a merging of worlds or something like that. And I'm not sure where it goes in Ghostbusters 2. But it was just like, this felt closer to like a Marvel movie beat, where it's like, oh, you got the firebender or the fire master, and he needs to learn how to bend fire, and he gets this big heroic beat at the end of the movie. And it was just like everything that's set up to me didn't really feel Ghostbusters. I don't know. You're more knowledgeable with it than me. Did it feel Ghostbusters to you?
So, I mean, the main issue I found with the villain is like he did feel very, villain of the week. Very Marvel villain. He's gonna die at the end and it's not gonna matter. Like I said, I took this more of really, this was like the kind of villain you'd see in the cartoon more so than the movies. Cause, at the end of the day, the movies are about like the team, not necessarily the villain that they're fighting, where obviously for IP purposes, they're kind of switching it now. So like, oh, we can do as many of these movies. They have like a big bad that will fight for 10 minutes at the end, which is kind of a shame because like in theory, I actually kind of like the idea of like him freezing everything, which my big complaint is, I think, one of my favorite ideas, I don't know if it was necessarily done well, but my favorite idea was the entire trailer where we have like the storm come in.
I agree. I think that's freeze. The most competent part of the movie too.
And we saw it in the trailer. The entire trailer was this scene, and I was like, you wasted kind of, the pinnacle scene that I'm like, this is Cool. Well, too bad I've already seen it 800 times because I've gone to the movies and had to watch it before every movie. And it's like you wasted the best scene.
Yeah, like the setup of like the death chill where, you know, it was so cold in July that everyone in New York froze to death or whatever, you know, that I was like, yeah, that's a cool setup. I understand, you know, the whole like shiver up your spine, you know, obviously scares and horror being associated with the cold. I like all that. I agree. I think that conceptually is all interesting. It's just, once again, it's just, for me, it's more so the inclusion of Kumail Nanjiani as this faded firekeeper that in order to beat the villain, he just needs to fire blast the villain as it's shot with a couple of special proton packs, you know, type of thing, where, you know, they even do like, the proton pack isn't good enough. I need to brass plate this one, and it's like a super powered proton pack, and it's like, sure. Once again, I don't know if any of this shit's in any of the other source material. It's just, for me, it was just like, it's not an interesting solution to defeating your villain. It's essentially just the solution of our power levels need to get higher. And it was just like, okay, I didn't care. I honestly, there was an aspect or a point in the movie that I thought they were going to do the heel turn of where Kumail Nanjiani's character was going to be evil. It was weird because it was like kind of like his hair kind of had like this grayish tinge to it, which of course could look like maybe like a little bit like icy, like a Jack Frost. I was thinking like what could be like the opposite of fire keeping. It could be like, you know, instead of creating heat, it could be like expelling it. I thought maybe he was going to have some relation, but like in an inverse effect, like, you know, once again, he was fated to be the firekeeper, but he's not. And it was just kind of like, I just wish Kumail Nanjiani was the villain in this more than this weird CGI monster. Or I wish Kumail wasn't in it at all and it was just the CGI monster. It's just like, I don't know. Basically, the direction they went with this, I think, was the least interesting. And the movie completely just lost me on how poorly they mishandled all these characters that I actually cared about in the original. That's the thing, like, me not caring about Podcaster thinking he's terribly handled in this movie is awful. Me not even being able to remember Lucky's name, I have to scroll up every single time. It's just like, she was a good character in the previous movie. Phoebe and Finn Wolfhard were great. And that's the thing, it's just like, all these characters in the movie are just given short shrift to allow Dan Aykroyd to be in every single scene and for some reason focus on Paul Rudd. And once again, I like Paul Rudd, but like for him to be essentially the star of this movie, I just thought was silly. If you even look at the poster, he's like the one who's framed dead center of the poster, huge, like he's, you know, he's an extra couple inches bigger than everybody else. And it's just like, I didn't need that or want that in my Ghostbusters sequel. I don't mind the adults being involved around the periphery. I don't mind them suiting up and being involved for the third act. I don't even mind in the beginning them being part of like the opening ghost catching thing. It's just I don't want them to be like so present throughout the entire movie. I want them essentially to basically be like overbearing, or, you know, these are all teenagers, right? Like just basically having these strict curfew or these strict guidelines that they want their kids to be operating under, and I want the kids to be sneaking out and saying, oh, screw it, I know we're not supposed to go to this section of town because the ghosts are so vicious here, but we're doing it anyways. Like, you want the rebelliousness of these teenagers being teenagers, which I thought to a certain degree was in the first movie. And once again, I've only seen that movie once. Maybe I'm misremembering aspects of it, but I just thought basically everything across the board was better handled in that movie. And once again, I will agree that it might not be as close to what the original spirit of the Ghostbusters is. In a certain regard, I remember that movie being closer to The Force Awakens. But if this is what is closer to the spirit of the original Ghostbusters, then very much that's why the movies weren't really for me, because I hated this. And like I thought like even like the flat lighting and the way it looked, I thought a lot of it looked very old and uninspired. And there was even aspects of like, are they trying to make it look like the 80s movie when we're here in the beginning of this New York scene where it seems like everything is kind of like undersaturated and lit like if it's a sitcom or something? It was just, I don't know, dude. I'm not even talking about spoiler stuff anymore. I'm just ranting. But that's the thing. It's just like, I don't have things to talk about in this other than complaining.
I mean, really, like I said, I think it really comes down to it had way too many characters. To me, this is almost like a Spider-Man 3 situation. Just not so many villains, a ton of good guys. Is that, to me, like, this could have been a whole other movie split it in half, like put some of those characters in a, Ghostbusters 3 of this franchise. Like, it seemed like they wanted to cram so much in. I'm thinking probably due to the fact that, like I said, like Bill Murray, those guys have, like, Bill has no interest in revisiting this. So it was probably like, well, since we got him, we got to cram this storyline in because, realistically, if Bill Murray's in it and Ghostbusters is on the title, like, he is the selling point of this franchise. Even though this is Dan Aykroyd's baby, the original, like, he co-created, wrote it, like, 1 and 2 were sold because of Bill Murray.
Yeah, people would be pissed if Bill Murray wasn't in this movie. But I don't know if they'd be as angry as Bill Murray actually being in this movie. Because, once again, I'm telling you, he did not want to be there. Rowan, are we missing anything? Is there anything you want to talk about before we review this? No? Okay. So if you're new to the podcast, our review rubric is nay, okay, yay, or slay. So, Rowan, what would you give Ghostbusters Frozen Empire?
Oh, Colton, don't hate me. I'm not going to give it something crazy. I will give it a light okay. Like, I wasn't offended by this. To me, this is kind of like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of like some like mediocre, Marvel television show or something. Like it was something I'd watch. I probably could have, seen this on Netflix and been a little happier that, I didn't spend money on it or anything like that. I thought to waste 2 hours, sure, whatever. It had enough nostalgia for me as a lover of it. Like I said, you brought up, they talked about, the Lady Liberty walking from the second one. We got a couple scenes in the background with the pink plasma goo, which is like the main force in the second one that causes, the Statue of Liberty to walk and stuff. So I like that. And there was things like, I always think the Stay Puft Marshmallow things are funny, like just like self-mutilating each other. Although I'm very scared. Like, is this gonna be a Despicable Me situation where we're gonna get like side Stay Puft movies, just these guys causing havoc or something?
Honestly, I'm surprised they never leaned more into them in like the marketing and stuff, doing little shorts and stuff and putting them in front of like Sony produced movies and shit. Like,
yeah,
it just felt like, I don't know, they really doubled down on that. I don't know if you stayed for the mid credit scene either.
I did.
Yeah, but that's like another one where it's just very much focused on the little Stay Puft guys, right? So
yeah, and like the only thing I didn't mention in the review, like I did love the callback to the original with the library ghost, which is
I got that as well.
The ghost from the first one, and I thought it was funny. It was Aykroyd again, confronting her, and then I think the real problem here, that I can't give this a higher rating for, which is every Ghostbuster fan's issue, is we still have not offered enough money to Rick Moranis to return to these movies, who I think really it wasn't Bill Murray that won the first Ghostbusters. It was Rick Moranis. Like, he was the highlight of it. And I know they've been trying to get him back for every single other one. I think he is in 2, but that was pretty much around the time he retired.
Yeah, I think he's been basically retired now for ages.
And I do know there was talks, I think in the 2016 one, that he had said that he was kind of in talks to come back, but I mean, he's made it known, like, he's really not interested in acting anymore. He does voice work. That's about it. So, sadly, these are probably never gonna ever reach a slay moment for me, because you got to have Rick Moranis for me to give you a slay. Be automatic slay with Rick Moranis. But for now, you're gonna get a light okay. Colton, what would you give Ghostbusters Frozen Empire?
This is a hard nay from me. Once again, I've said multiple times on the show that if it's a bad movie, but it's entertaining, at least I can, I might be able to say, like, it's worth a watch, because it was so funny to laugh at. This is one of those movies to me that I just felt was soulless. The whole thing felt just like people were here purely for a paycheck. I thought it was so dreadfully dull. I thought it was disrespectful what they did to a bunch of characters that I enjoyed from the previous movie. And basically, I could brainstorm for 10 minutes and I think come up with better plot lines for most of these characters to go on in this movie, at least for what I would have enjoyed. But I just hated watching this. There's no other way around it. Like, I was just scrolling really quickly to see the other couple of movies we've reviewed on this show this year. And it's like, I disliked this more than Night Swim or Out of Darkness or Lisa Frankenstein or friggin' Imaginary, which we watched like a week ago. I just, once again, there might be aspects of this that are technically better than some of those other movies that I just mentioned. And obviously it has a way larger budget than probably a larger budget than all of them combined. But I just couldn't stand this movie. I just think it was so boring and so bad and so uninspired that it's a hard nay from me. And once again, if you're a Ghostbusters fan, power to you. Maybe you'll get something out of it. A couple of people I follow online are huge Ghostbusters fans and love this movie. I'm not, and I did not love this movie, so it's a nay from me. And if you made it this far in the show and you're not following us on our socials already, you can do so at It Slays Podcast. We're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, / or Letterboxd, Threads, Blue Sky. If there's a social media, we're probably there at It Slays Podcast. And if you want to help support the show financially, like our horror hounds Holly, Nicholas, Patrick, Mark, Stephen, Joy, Carvey, Dan, Brian, Trevor, and Genesis, gain access to the Patreon exclusive show Stream Screams and get episodes of the main show 48 hours early, be sure to head on over to patreon.com/itslayspodcast and choose whatever tier works best for you. Rowan, I don't think we discussed the music on either of these movies.
Yeah, I don't
anything
think
gonna
so.
Make the playlist?
I'm not sure. I might have to check Immaculate again, but I feel like there wasn't much that'll probably make any of these playlists. But
Ghostbusters theme on there already?
No, I should put the Ghostbusters theme on there. It might be already be on. I'll have to check that. Maybe that'll make it. Because I'm sure someday we'll watch the original one, and then I'll have an excuse to actually put it on there. But yeah, go to Spotify, go to the It Slays Podcast Horrific playlist. If you have any problems finding it, you can go to any of the social media that Colton just mentioned. Go to the Linktree link in the bio, click it. It'll take you directly there. We upload scores or licensed music from iconic horror movies we review, or just horror movies we love. So yeah, go to the playlist and get your spooky music on, because why the hell not?
And next time on the show, we'll likely be covering a smaller Shudder release, I believe, called You'll Never Find Me. And then coming up, we also have Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey 2, and what is it? The First Omen? I think it's called. Yeah. So, you know, we got a few different things coming to you from Now Slang within the next couple of weeks. So keep an eye on your podcast feeds. And with that, I think that about wraps things up for this episode. So until next time, I'm Colton.
I'm Rowan.
And as long as you keep listening, we'll keep slaying.